Native American boarding schools. It's a term some of you may never have heard of before. Established in 1879, the Carlisle, Pennsylvania school ran until 1918. However, boarding schools have been a part of Native American lives for decades, clear up until the 1980s. And I will say this, even today, some of the Christian mission schools on the reservations themselves still have the mentality of the early boarding schools. Kill the Indian and save the man. That was their motto, so to speak. This was not the retraining of Native Americans to become white people. This was the assassination of a culture.
Worst of all, the Bureau of Indian Affairs committed these acts against the children entrusted to its boarding schools, brutalizing them emotionally, psychologically, physically, and spiritually. So many of the maladies suffered today in Indian country result from the failures of this agency. Poverty, ignorance, and disease have been the product of this agency's work. And so today I stand before you as the leader of an institution that in the past has committed acts so terrible that they infect, diminish, and destroy the lives of Indian people decades later, generations later. These things occurred despite the efforts of many good people with good hearts who sought to prevent them. These wrongs must be acknowledged if the healing is to begin. Kevin Gover, Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs Department of the Interior.
Complicated story. It's one that people need to, Americans need to be told, because I think most Americans have no idea at all about the boarding schools.
They wanted to wipe out the Indian, so they took me away from my grandpa and to wipe my native tongue and native ways.
We was always taught, our first education was to respect the land and the animals. And then our second learning was to respect others, no matter who they are.
But formal education with Europeans meant taking young pupils and placing them in a location where they would be expected to learn a new language, learn new ways, especially learning how to read. And mixed with that education would be religion and the idea that the religion of Indian people, the ways of Indian people were somehow backward, un-Christian, uncivilized, and that meaning the Europeans would want to change that which was native. It was a major difference in trying to take children away from their communities and their families and put them in a new setting where they could change that child. Things that Pratt did as soon as he became the superintendent of that school was to transform it into a prison-like setting with very large fences. There was a guardhouse, there was a jail there to place the children. There were dormitories that were set up very military-like. In fact, the whole atmosphere was much that of a prison, the prison that he had known before as a warden. And he began his control. As he had tried to control the American Indian prisoners of war, he tried to control the Indian children at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School.
When children arrived at the Carlisle Indian School, especially the very first groups to come who came directly from their traditional communities and who had not had previous schooling experiences, their hair was cut short and they were put into uniform and organized into military regiments or battalions, and they went through the process of acculturation in a way that stripped them of everything native.
They lost their native names, they lost their languages, their clothes were taken away from them, all of the medicine that they had brought with them, the foods that they had brought with them, that was put aside as inferior and not to be used at the school.
And it wasn't just that they removed those things, but those things were actually burned as sort of a public spectacle, sort of a burning away of their old way of life.
Be expected of some of them. An Indian man only cuts his hair in times of great mourning.
Surely, if it's their tradition.
Old habits must be unlearned. The sooner the better.
Yep.
I didn't know any other language. So whenever I talk, it came out. Cree would come out, and whenever I talk, I get hit. I got the hits so much I lost my tongue. I lost my native tongue. The only thing I remember was my Indian name. Which is Xenukiyu, means old man eagle. That's the only Cree I knew.
Tuga shila oshimlayo. 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 Shila oshimlayo.
While they were successful in killing the Indian culture in many of these children, they failed to nurture them, to protect them as their families would have done. It created a legacy of abuse that would continue through many generations, even to the present.
A lot of the social dysfunctionality we find in Native communities, I would say we could directly trace back to really the pain and the grief, sort of the intergenerational trauma that gets handed down through generations as a result of, this traumatic period of Native people's lives of having themselves removed from their loved ones into, these boarding schools that really were what the sociologist Irving Goffman calls total institutions.
One of the major things that was taught in boarding school was for us to be ashamed of our culture, for us to be ashamed of our language, to be ashamed of our parents. And with that ingrained in us as young children, over time, that became ingrained in many of our psyches.
Not only that, we lost ties with the family, and you'll find out that a good majority of ones from went to Mount Edgecombe never really learned how to take care of their kids, because we lost all of that, closeness with the family.
And they were not being taught by example by their own parents and grandparents how to act and how to be. And so there was that major disconnect that many boarding school students talk about when they come home, and then when they have their own families, about how to be a father, how to be a mother. And that I think we still see the impact of that today within some of our Native communities.
I myself was not a victim of the boarding school process. I went to private schools in the 1960s. However, the difference is I got to go home each night after school. However, I will say this, in the private or parochial school environment, my heritage was something that I was afraid to talk about. It would bring a lot of teasing amongst the other kids if I were to bring it up, as well as being put down or degraded by the nuns, the priests, and the monks for the savage culture that I considered important in my life.